He beat the addictions that cost him his job, his family, and his dignity. He clawed his way back from rock bottom to become the undisputed WWE champion in a moment of pure redemption. He was clean. He was a hero. He was finally saved. Then, just 18 months later, he was found dead not from the addiction, but from the scars of a war he had already won. This is the story of Eddie Guerrero. How does a man win the fight for his soul, only to have his body pay the price? When you talk about Eddie Guerrero, you have to start with his family. He didn't just get into wrestling, he was born into it, right in El Paso, Texas in 1967. Being a Guerrero in that world wasn't like being a doctor's son. It was more like being a Coppola in filmmaking or a Bach in music. The name itself was a crown, and man, was it a heavy one. His father was the legendary Gory Guerrero. Now, for folks who might only know the American wrestling superstars, Gory was on another level. A true giant in Mexico. He was one of the absolute pioneers of lucha libre, a master craftsman. While other guys like the famous El Santo were the masked superheroes, Gory was the innovator. This was the man inventing holds that are still being used today. He's the one who gave us the Gory special, that brutal back-to-back backbreaker, and La de a Caballo, a variation of the camel clutch. He was a rudo, a bad guy, but he was so skilled, so technically brilliant, that the crowds couldn't help but respect him. But Gory wasn't just a wrestler, he was the boss. He ran the whole El Paso wrestling territory. This meant the Guerrero house wasn't a normal home. It was the corporate office. It was the training center. Young Eddie didn't just see his dad go to work. He watched him book the shows, manage the talent, count the money, and deal with all the cutthroat politics of the business. He was learning the guts of the industry before he was even a teenager. He learned the why, that wrestling wasn't just about moves, it was about telling a story and drawing a crowd. And he wasn't alone. Wrestling was the family language. His older brothers, Chavo Sr., Mando, and Hector, were all in the ring, and they were legitimate talents. Chavo Sr., in particular, was a huge star in Los Angeles. So when Eddie came along, he was Gory's youngest son. He was Chavo's little brother. Imagine that pressure. He was the baby of the family, trying to keep up with seasoned professionals in his own backyard. They had a ring out back, and they didn't just play, they drilled. Gory taught them the pure lucha libre style, which isn't just the high-flying flips you see. It's built on laves or keys, a complex system of chain wrestling, counters, and submissions. It's fluid, intricate, and incredibly difficult. They were taught to be snug, to be credible, to make every single move look like it hurt. This is why Eddie was always so crisp in the ring. When he hit an arm drag, it looked like he was trying to rip the man's arm off. When he locked in a hold, it looked like agony. He was a true luchador, a craftsman, taught by one of the masters. But here's the final, perfect piece. He grew up in El Paso, right on the border. He wasn't just a luchador, he was a perfect hybrid. He had all the technical brilliance and high-flying artistry from his father's lucha libre, but he also grew up watching gritty American-style Texas wrestling. He understood brawling. He understood character. He understood how to talk on a microphone. He was this perfect, electrifying blend of two worlds, the very essence of what would become Latino Heat. He was the complete package, and every single piece of it was forged in that house, under the watchful eye of Gory Guerrero. Eddie's journey through the wrestling world was long and brutal, a true testament to his raw talent and relentless determination. After honing his skills in the family business and various independent circuits, he exploded in Mexico's AAA promotion. From there, he burst onto the American scene in the early 90s, first in the raw, chaotic environment of Extreme Championship Wrestling, and then in the big budget circus of World Championship Wrestling. In WCW, he was a cornerstone of the revolutionary cruiserweight division, showcasing a breathtaking blend of lucha libre artistry and American technical prowess. But it was his jump to WWE in 2000 that truly lit the fuse. He, alongside his best friends Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn, walked out of WCW in a move that stunned the industry. When they arrived, famously dubbed the Radicals, they were an invasion force of pure, unadulterated wrestling talent. His early WWE tenure was a masterclass in character development. While Benoit and Malenko were presented as stoic wrestling machines, Eddie immediately burst through with a charisma you just couldn't teach. This was where the Latino Heat persona, this smooth-talking, devilishly charming, and passionate character, was born. It all clicked, and audiences were instantly captivated. This was where the lie, cheat, steal mantra truly came to life. It wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a philosophy he embodied in the ring. He'd feign an injury, he'd distract the referee, he'd use a chair and then toss it to his opponent just as the ref turned around, and then, with that 1,000-watt wink and a smile, he'd celebrate his ill-gotten victory, utterly unapologetic. And the amazing thing? People loved it. He wasn't a traditional mustache-twirling villain. He was an anti-hero. He was the lovable rogue who bent the rules, but he did it with such style and charisma that you couldn't help but cheer for him. His matches were always a thrill. His promos were electrifying. He won the European Championship, the Intercontinental Championship, and showed everyone he wasn't just a cruiserweight. He was a main event star in the making. However, behind the dazzling performances and that infectious charm, Eddie was fighting a much more personal and far more dangerous battle. His struggles with addiction to alcohol and painkillers were intensifying, a dark shadow that had loomed over his life. This wasn't just a random vice, it had a specific tragic starting point. A horrifying car accident on New Year's Day 1999. He was reportedly thrown 100 feet from his vehicle, suffering massive injuries, including a shattered pelvis. He was lucky to be alive, let alone walk. This began a deep, desperate dependency on painkillers just to get through the grueling demands of the wrestling lifestyle and the constant pressure to perform. This hidden struggle came to a head in late 2001 when he was arrested for driving under the influence. The incident led to his release from WWE, a devastating, humiliating blow for a man who had seemingly reached the pinnacle of his career. This period was, without question, the darkest chapter in Eddie's life. Stripped of his livelihood, his reputation in tatters, and facing the very real consequences of his addiction, he hit rock bottom. His wife, Vicky, was at her limit, and he was on the verge of losing not just his job, but his family. But this wasn't the end of Eddie's story. It was a pivotal, agonizing turning point. With the unwavering support of Vicky and his family, Eddie embarked on a painful but ultimately successful journey to sobriety. He sought help, he went to rehab, really went this time, and dedicated himself to recovery. This period of self-reflection and healing, though immensely difficult, allowed him to confront his demons and emerge stronger, more focused, and deeply, profoundly committed to his family and his career. His return to WWE in 2002 was nothing short of miraculous. He was not just physically healthier, he was spiritually renewed. The fans, who were well aware of his public struggles and his fight back, embraced him with an even greater fervor. He was no longer just a charismatic wrestler. He was a symbol of hope and redemption. He formed a tag team with his nephew, Chavo Guerrero Jr., as Los Guerreros, a duo that cemented his lie, cheat, steal persona, but now with a comedic twist. This is where they perfected the comedy of it. They had these hilarious vignettes. One week, they'd be interrupting a moment of silence with their lowrider's hydraulics. The next, they'd be trying to con other wrestlers or stealing the Big Show's burrito. They were so undeniably fun that audiences had no choice but to cheer for them. The comeback culminated in arguably the greatest moment of his career, No Way Out 2004. He was facing the dominant, seemingly invincible Brock Lesnar for the WWE Championship. Eddie, the underdog, the recovering addict, the lovable rogue, defied every single expectation. In a match filled with drama, suspense, and a perfectly executed frog splash, Eddie Guerrero pinned Brock Lesnar, becoming the WWE Champion. The crowd erupted in a roar that shook the arena. That moment with Eddie standing in the ring, tears streaming down his face, clutching the championship belt, confetti raining down, and his best friend Chris Benoit, himself on the path to his own WrestleMania moment, sliding into the ring to embrace him. It wasn't just a wrestling victory. It was a victory for anyone who had ever struggled, stumbled, and fought their way back from the brink. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph, a testament to the power of perseverance and the human spirit. He became the first ever Mexican-American WWE champion, a groundbreaking achievement that resonated deeply with the Latin community and solidified his place as a true icon. But that official summary, as accurate as it is, just breezes past some of the most critical, formative, and downright brilliant parts of his story. We have to go back. It starts in Mexico in AAA in the early 90s. Eddie wasn't just making a name for himself. He was part of an explosion. AAA was the Attitude Era of Mexico, and Eddie formed a tag team with a man who would become his other brother, Art Barr. Art was known as the Love Machine, a flamboyant, incredibly charismatic performer, and together they were La Pareja del Terror, the terror couple. Eddie was the technician, and Art Barr was the charismatic wild man. They, along with Conan, El Hijo del Santo, and others, were changing the game. This is where the first kernel of lie, cheat, steal was born. Eddie and Art played the Gringos Locos, the crazy Americans, even though Eddie was Mexican-American who hated Mexico and everything about it. They cheated. They insulted the crowd. They were obnoxious, and they were brilliant. They formed a stable with other non-Mexican wrestlers and became the most hated and most successful act in the company. Eddie learned how to get real heat, how to control a crowd, how to be a star. And then tragedy. In November 1994, just as they were on the verge of jumping to ECW and then likely WCW or WWE as a team, Art Barr died suddenly at 28. It was devastating for Eddie. He lost his best friend, his partner. This loss haunted him. You'll notice for the rest of his career, Eddie used the frog splash as his finisher. That was Art Barr's move. Every time he climbed that top rope, it was a tribute. That tragedy fueled so much of his drive, but it also left a scar, a darkness he would carry with him. He was lost, but Paul Heyman of ECW called him. He said, "I know you're grieving. Come here. We don't have much money, but I'll give you a platform." Paul Heyman, a genius booker, saw what WCW and WWE didn't. He saw two pure wrestlers in Eddie and Dean Malenko and understood that was all they needed to be. He didn't ask them to be extreme or change who they were. He asked them to be themselves. And that's exactly what they did. Eddie's run in ECW in 1995 is legendary. He and Malenko, another wrestler's wrestler, were put in the ring and told to just wrestle. In a company known for barbed wire, fire, and chairs, Eddie and Dean put on 20-minute clinics. They had a series of matches, 2 out of 3 falls, technical masterpieces that were so good the notoriously bloodthirsty ECW crowd was mesmerized. He also had some absolute classics with Too Cold Scorpio that blended high flying with raw technical skill. When it was time for both him and Malenko to leave for WCW, the crowd, these tough-as-nails fans, gave them a standing ovation and chanted, "Please don't go." It was a beautiful, real moment proving that five-star wrestling could get over anywhere. Then came WCW. And for years, WCW was a story of triumph and profound frustration. Yes, he was part of the cruiserweight division, and those matches, my goodness. Eddie versus Rey Mysterio Jr. at Halloween Havoc 1997. If you haven't seen it, stop what you're doing and find it. It's a title versus mask match, and it's flawless. If you watch it back, you see Eddie, the veteran heel, masterfully controlling the pace, grounding the high flyer, tearing at the mask. He's the general, and he leads Rey, this young, incredible high flyer, to the greatest match of his life. It's high-flying lucha libre blended with perfect American psychology. He had classics with Malenko, with Chris Jericho, with Ultimo Dragon. He and the other cruiserweights were, without question, the best part of Monday Nitro week in and week out. But that was the problem. They were only the cruiserweights. They were stuck. No matter how good their matches were, no matter how much the crowd loved them, they were never going to be in the main event. That spot was reserved for Hogan, Savage, Nash, Hall, and the NWO. There was a glass ceiling, and Eddie, being smaller and Mexican-American, felt it more than most. This frustration boiled over into reality. He famously went to Eric Bischoff, the head of WCW, and asked for a push for a chance to move up the card. Bischoff, according to legend, responded by literally throwing a cup of coffee at him. This disrespect fueled Eddie's anger, and he channeled it. He went on TV and gave a fiery promo, blurring the lines, talking about his real-life frustrations with WCW management. This led to the creation of the Latino World Order, or LWO, a clear parody of the NWO. It was a group of all the other Mexican wrestlers who were also being held down. It was a fantastic idea, a legitimate storyline born from real frustration. The LWO t-shirts were selling, and the group was getting over. And then in a moment that just summed up WCW, they had the NWO Wolfpack come out and beat up the entire LWO, forcing them to disband. It was smart, it was real, and WCW panicked and buried it. That was the last straw. By late 1999, WCW was a creative dumpster fire. Eddie, along with his best friends, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn, had enough. They were four of the best technical wrestlers on the planet, and they were being wasted. In a move that shocked the industry, all four of them asked for their release and, in January 2000, walked out of WCW and showed up on WWE Raw together. It was a massive statement. The Radicals had arrived. Now, in WWE, he finally got to show his personality, and it all clicked with the Latino Heat storyline. He became obsessed with China, calling her his mamacita. It was stalkerish and problematic by today's standards. But in the Attitude Era, it was comedy gold. It was this perfect odd couple dynamic. China was the ninth wonder of the world, this dominant, imposing, powerful woman. And here was this smaller, slimy yet charming guy relentlessly pursuing her. The chemistry was undeniable. He was this slimy, cheating, overly passionate lover boy, and China was the dominant woman who was somehow charmed by him. He'd cheat to win matches for her, he'd bring her roses, and he finally won his first big WWE title, the European Championship, from Chris Jericho with China's help. He was a star. The audience adored him. And that's when the bottom fell out. The pressures of this new stardom, combined with the lingering, agonizing pain from that 1999 car accident, led him down a dark path. He had rushed his recovery, desperate to get back to the ring and capitalize on his new contract. The only way to do that, to perform through that kind of pain, was painkillers. Lots of them. This wasn't recreational. This was a desperate attempt to manage a career-ending injury. He got hooked. Then alcohol. He was a mess. His work got sloppy. He'd show up late or not at all. The company sent him to rehab in May 2001, but he couldn't stay clean. In November 2001, he was arrested for a DUI. That was it. WWE fired him over the phone. Imagine that. You're on top of the world. You've finally made it. And in an instant, it's all gone. Your career, your money, and, as he later admitted, very nearly his family. Vicky was ready to leave him. He had lost everything. This wilderness period is the most important part of his story. He didn't quit. He went to rehab for real this time, and he went back to work. Not in the big arenas, but in high school gyms, in tiny bingo halls. He wrestled for independent promotions like Ring of Honor and IW Mid-South. He was Eddie Guerrero, a global superstar, wrestling in front of 200 people. He was wrestling in front of 300 people for Ring of Honor, having technical masterpieces. He had a legendary 3-match series with a young, unknown kid named CM Punk, giving that future star some of the best matches of his early career. He wasn't just proving he was clean. He was actively elevating the next generation and falling in love with the craft of wrestling all over again. He did it to prove to himself, to his family, and to the WWE that he was clean, that he was sober, and that he was still one of the best in the world. He had to rebuild his life and his reputation from scratch, and he did it. In April 2002, less than 6 months after being fired, WWE rehired him. He was back, but he was different. He was humbled. He was grateful. This is when the lie, cheat, steal philosophy was truly born. He teamed with his nephew, Chavo Guerrero Jr., as Los Guerreros. They'd drive to the ring in that iconic lowrider, the hydraulics bouncing to the theme song. They were still heels, but they were lovable heels. They had these classic vignettes. They'd steal Kurt Angle's trophy and then Angle's replacement trophy. They'd con the Big Show out of a lowrider. They had one where they tried to sell Chavo's family heirloom at a pawn shop, which was just a hubcap they'd stolen. They were so entertaining that the crowd had to cheer for them. They weren't just lying, cheating, and stealing. As their t-shirt said, "We lie, we cheat, we steal, but at least we're honest about it." It was a paradox, and it was brilliant. This run catapulted him. He had a brutal star-making feud with John Cena in 2003 over the U.S. title. This included a parking lot brawl that wasn't a match. It was a fight. They were brawling on car hoods, smashing each other into concrete walls and just brutalizing one another. It was vicious, and it showed a new gritty side of Eddie. It also helped make John Cena, who was just a young rapper gimmick at the time, look like a legitimate tough guy. It elevated both of them. Eddie was hotter than ever, and the company saw it. They saw this man who had clawed his way back from the abyss, who had the crowd in the palm of his hand, which brings us to No Way Out, February 2004. He was challenging Brock Lesnar. Brock was a monster, a legitimate 300-pound beast, a former NCAA champion. Eddie was the 5'8" underdog. The story wasn't just, can the little guy beat the big guy? The story, which Brock hammered home, was, you're an addict. You're a loser. You don't have what it takes to win the big one. You'll choke just like you did in your life. It was raw, and it was real. The match at the Cow Palace was electric. The crowd believed in Eddie. He was beaten, thrown around, destroyed, but he wouldn't stay down. He kept fighting. And then at the climax, Goldberg, who Brock was feuding with, ran in and speared Lesnar. The ref was down. Eddie saw his chance. He climbed to the top rope. The crowd was on its feet, roaring. He hit the frog splash. 1, 2, 3. The explosion of sound. The building shook. Eddie grabbed the belt, his face a mask of disbelief and tears. He'd done it. He'd climbed the mountain. He'd faced his demons and won. When his best friend, Chris Benoit, who had also won his title shot that night, slid into the ring to celebrate with him. As confetti fell, it's one of the purest, most real moments in wrestling history. It was redemption in its truest form. His title reign was fantastic. He had a classic feud with Kurt Angle, where Eddie, in a moment of pure genius, was caught in the ankle lock. He started screaming, unlacing his boot. Angle, confused, pulled, and the boot came right off. Eddie was free. He rolled Angle up and won. It was genius. It wasn't just cheating, it was smart. He used the rules and his opponent's own aggression against him. He outthought the wrestling machine. And then in his final year, 2005, he showed us his last great performance, a dark, twisted feud with his friend Rey Mysterio. Eddie had a secret about Rey's son, Dominic. The secret that Eddie was Dominic's real father. It was an absurd soap opera storyline, but Eddie played it with such terrifying, psychotic intensity. He was desperate, jealous of Rey's perfect life. This all led to one of the most bizarre and honestly iconic matches in history, a ladder match for the custody of Dominic at SummerSlam. They were literally fighting on a ladder for a briefcase that contained a kid's custody papers. It sounds insane, and it was, but they were so good. They made you believe in the stakes. It was uncomfortable, and it was brilliant. It proved he could be the lovable hero and the most despicable villain, sometimes in the same year. That was his range. That was his genius. Beyond the championships and the captivating in-ring performances, what truly cemented Eddie Guerrero's legacy was his profound, almost alarmingly real, emotional connection with the audience. He didn't just play a character, he was Eddie Guerrero, presented with all his scars and imperfections. His struggles with addiction, though initially a private torment, became an open book to his fans, particularly after his triumphant return. This vulnerability, this willingness to expose his own fractured past, created an unprecedented bond. When he spoke about his past demons, there was no pretense, no attempt to sugarcoat the harsh realities. He spoke with a raw, often shaky honesty, and in doing so, he allowed millions of people to see a piece of themselves in him. This wasn't the old-school babyface crying after a title loss. This was different. This was a man's voice cracking under the weight of real memories, his eyes welling up with a gratitude that felt less like a performance and more like a confession. He let people see the fight inside him, not just the fight in the ring. A poignant example of Eddie's emotional depth, and a story not always widely discussed, comes from that dark period immediately following his dismissal from WWE in 2001. While struggling to maintain sobriety and piece his life back together, he wrestled on the independent circuit. He was performing in smaller venues, high school gyms, bingo halls, far from the bright lights and roaring crowds, often in front of just a few hundred people. One specific story from this era illustrates his enduring commitment to his craft and his genuine love for the fans. After a particularly difficult show in a dimly lit hall, with only a handful of people remaining, a young boy approached Eddie, clutching a worn-out lucha libre mask. The boy was shy, almost trembling, as he asked Eddie to sign it. This was Eddie Guerrero, a global superstar, a Guerrero, a man who had wrestled at the Tokyo Dome, in the absolute wilderness of his career. Instead of rushing off or showing any sign of weariness, he knelt down, looked the boy directly in the eyes, and spent several minutes talking to him about wrestling, about dreams, and about the importance of never giving up. He not only signed the mask with a flourish, but also shared a small, encouraging anecdote about his own early days, leaving the boy beaming. It was a simple, quiet interaction, far removed from the grand spectacle of his later WWE triumphs. But it spoke volumes about the man beneath the Latino Heat persona. This was a man rebuilding himself, not as a superstar, but as a person, rediscovering the simple, pure joy of that connection between a performer and a fan. It was an act of profound humility, a sign that even in his darkest hour, he possessed an innate kindness and an understanding of the impact he had. He knew what it meant to inspire, and he never took that responsibility lightly, regardless of the size of the audience. His relationships with his family, particularly his wife Vicky and his daughters, were another source of immense emotional impact. Vicky was his rock, his steadfast supporter through thick and thin. Her unwavering faith in him during his addiction struggles was a cornerstone of his recovery. But she was more than just a passive supporter. She was a survivor of his addiction. She was the one who had to issue the ultimatums, the one who had to protect her children and manage a household while her husband was, by his own admission, falling apart. Vicky herself recounted how, during his darkest days when he was living away from home trying to get clean, he would call her every single night. Sometimes he'd just want to hear her voice. Other times, he'd confess his struggles and fears. It was a testament to their deep bond, but it was also his lifeline. Those calls were his proof of life, his desperate attempt to stay connected, to heal not just for himself but for his family. His recovery wasn't just about getting sober. It was about the long, painful process of earning her trust back. He often spoke openly about how his family was the driving force behind his fight for sobriety. This humanized him even further, allowing fans to see the loving but flawed husband and father beneath the wrestling superstar. He was a girl dad through and through. He had 3 daughters, Shaul, Sherilyn, and Kaylee. Shaul would even go on to become a wrestler for a time in WWE's developmental system. But to him, they were his world. He was haunted by the idea that his addiction was stealing their childhood, that they would remember him not as their hero, but as a broken, absent father. His fight for sobriety wasn't just for his career. It was a fight for their memories of him. He was desperate to be the father they deserved, and that drive was perhaps more powerful than any championship. And then there were his brothers of the road. That bond with Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Rey Mysterio wasn't just a casual friendship. These men practically lived together. They were a band of brothers in a foreign land. They had traveled the world from Japan to Mexico, to ECW, to WCW, and finally to WWE. For years, they were in the same cars, same hotels, same locker rooms, and, most importantly, sharing the same frustrations. In the 90s, the era of the Giants, they were all too small. They were labeled not marketable, just good hands. They were brilliant technicians in an industry that valued bodybuilders. This shared disrespect forged an ironclad bond. They were in a conspiracy together. Every night they went out to steal the show, to have a match so technically brilliant, so breathtakingly good that the office had to notice. His friendship with Chris Benoit was legendary. They were the ultimate odd couple. Benoit was the crippler, a stoic, intense, laser-focused machine. Eddie was all heart, all passion, all charismatic fire. They balanced each other. Long before most American fans knew their names, they were having brutal, technically flawless matches against each other in Japan, beating the hell out of each other, and then sharing a beer and a laugh afterward. It was a bond forged in pain, respect, and a deep, unspoken trust. The embrace at the end of WrestleMania 20, with both men, the two unmarketable guys, holding their respective world championships was a cinematic climax. The raw emotion on their faces, the tears, the sheer disbelief and joy, it was the ultimate "we told you so." It was a decade of struggle, of being held down, of battling personal demons, all culminating in one single perfect image. It was a testament to enduring friendship in a fiercely competitive industry, showcasing a vulnerability and humanity that often remains hidden. That vulnerability was Eddie's magic trick. The era at the time was dominated by tough guys. Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Triple H, they were larger-than-life, trash-talking superheroes. They didn't show weakness. And here comes Eddie, a man who would weep in the ring. He'd weep with joy like at No Way Out. He'd weep with rage as he did in his feud with Ray. He'd weep with shame. He wore his heart on his sleeve, and that honesty was magnetic. It must be said WWE used his demons as part of the show. In today's lens, it might seem exploitative, and in many ways it was. But at the time, it also served a powerful narrative purpose. It made his struggles mythical. The feud with JBL in 2004 was built almost entirely on this. JBL wasn't just a rich bully. He was a man who relentlessly mocked Eddie's addictions, his disease. The hatred from the crowd was nuclear. It was no longer a storyline. It was personal. Then the feud escalated. They ran an angle where JBL, in a confrontation with Eddie's family, caused his mother to have a heart attack at ringside. It was a profound violation. It took the narrative from a simple wrestling feud to a blood feud. The audience wasn't just cheering for Eddie to win a match. They were praying for him to destroy this man who had attacked his heritage, his sobriety, and his family. It was uncomfortable, it was manipulative, and it was absolutely brilliant television, all anchored by the real, raw emotion Eddie brought to his own defense. A huge part of his recovery, something he was very open about, was his faith. Eddie became a born-again Christian after he got clean. This wasn't a gimmick. It was a fundamental part of who he was in those final years. He would talk about it in interviews. He'd pray before matches, and he saw his second chance in WWE as a literal gift from God. This faith gave him a new center, a new foundation that wasn't built on the shifting sands of crowd approval or championship belts. It was an inner peace that he'd been chasing his entire life. Through all the pills and all the bottles, he'd finally found it. It allowed him to separate Eddie Guerrero the man from Eddie Guerrero the performer, perhaps for the first time in his life. It also allowed him to find a new joy in his work. The lie, cheat, steal of his final babyface run felt less like a villain's tactics and more like a joyful trickster, a man having the time of his life, and he wanted to bring everyone along for the ride. And his relationship with Rey Mysterio was perhaps the most complex and brilliant of all. Rey was like his little brother. Eddie had known him since Rey was a teenager starting out in Mexico. There was a genuine, deep love there. Their in-ring chemistry was effortless. They moved as one, a seamless blend of lucha styles. That's precisely why their feud in 2005 was so brilliant and so deeply disturbing. This wasn't a standard heel turn. This was a complete psychological unraveling played out on national television. The "I'm your Poppy" and the custody of Dominic storyline. It was heartbreaking because we knew they loved each other. Eddie was playing a man so consumed by jealousy that he was willing to destroy his best friend. He was jealous of Rey's perfect life, a life he had almost thrown away. This was his final masterpiece of character work. He became obsessed. He filmed bedtime stories, vignettes, dark, unsettling segments where he'd read to Dominic about how Rey stole him. He was whispering poison. He played it with a psychotic, desperate intensity that was terrifying because it was a perversion of the real love that existed. It was the portrayal of a man's soul collapsing under the weight of his own insecurities. It was dark, it was psychological, and it was some of the most compelling, unsettling work of his entire career. It proved right at the end that his talent wasn't just in making people laugh, he could make their skin crawl. That's a range that very, very few performers in history have ever possessed. While Eddie Guerrero's legacy is overwhelmingly positive, celebrated for his charisma, his unmatched talent, and his inspiring comeback story, his life, like many in professional wrestling, wasn't without its share of historical controversies and ongoing debates. These discussions primarily surround the circumstances leading to his passing and the broader, often darker issues within the industry he dedicated his life to. It's crucial to be very clear about this. The tragedy of Eddie Guerrero is not simply that he was an addict who died. The ultimate tragedy is that he was a recovering addict who died. He had, by all public and private accounts, beat his demons. He got clean. He rebuilt his family. He won his life back. But the damage, the physical damage, was already done. The autopsy report was heartbreaking. It showed his heart was severely enlarged, a condition called atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. His blood vessels were narrowed and scarred. This wasn't the result of a recent binge. This was the bill coming due for a decade of systematic abuse. The painkillers, the alcohol, and yes, the steroids and performance-enhancing drugs that were rampant in that era, they all took their toll. He was 38 years old, but his heart was that of a much older, sicker man. He had won the spiritual and mental battle, but he couldn't undo the physical scars. Why did he and so many others fall into that trap? It was the schedule. It was the wrestling hangover. In the 90s and 2000s, there was no off-season. Wrestlers would perform over 300 days a year. A typical day involved finishing a brutal match, your back throbbing, your knee swollen, then getting in a car to drive 200 or 300 miles to the next town. They'd sleep for 4 hours in a cheap hotel, wake up, hit the gym, and do it all over again. How does a person do that? How does one perform at that level night after night? They take uppers to get them going, and they take downers just to get to sleep. It wasn't a party culture, it was a survival culture. And Eddie, with his high-impact, high-flying style, was in more pain than most. His finisher, the frog splash, required him to jump from an 8-foot-tall top rope and land chest first on another man. The cumulative damage of that single move, performed thousands of times, is unimaginable. He wasn't just trying to get high, he was trying to medicate the pain so he could continue to perform, continue to be Eddie Guerrero, and continue to provide for his family by doing the only thing he knew how to do. But it wasn't just the pain, it was the pressure. In that era, the pressure wasn't just to perform well, it was to look like a superhero. The rise of steroids had created a standard of physical perfection that was, for most, unattainable naturally. This meant that on top of the painkillers for the pain and the uppers for the road, many wrestlers were taking steroids to maintain the physique the company and the fans expected. This combination, a cocktail of uppers, downers, and steroids, was a ticking time bomb, and it was a direct result of the systemic issues within the industry. The industry at that time didn't just allow this, it almost required it. The pressure to be there, work through the pain, and look the part was immense. Another nuanced point of discussion, though it's less a controversy and more a reevaluation, pertains to the lie, cheat, steal persona. While universally beloved and a massive factor in his popularity, some have retrospectively questioned its impact. This, however, is mostly a modern, sanitized era discussion. Back then, nobody was questioning its impact. Audiences adored it. The reason it worked so well was that it was a brilliant piece of social commentary. The good guys of the era, like Kurt Angle or even John Cena, were often portrayed as sanctimonious, preachy, or hypocritical. The bad guys, like JBL, were often just cowardly, rich bullies. Eddie was the one real guy in the middle. He was a scoundrel, but he was our scoundrel. He was an honest liar. He was a lucha libre rudo who was so damn entertaining that audiences had no choice but to cheer him. It was a throwback to classic rogue characters in literature. He wasn't a role model. He was an escape. He did the things everyone wishes they could do to get one over on their boss. And he did it with an irresistible smile. He never presented it as a moral guideline, but as an entertaining, almost vaudevillian approach to winning. But the real controversy, the one that still stings and leaves a bitter taste, is what happened after he died. It was the shameless exploitation of his memory for profit and storylines. Just 2 weeks after his death, WWE ran one of the most disgusting and reviled promos in its history. Randy Orton, then a top heel, was feuding with Rey Mysterio. In the build-up to a match, Orton looked at Rey, a man who was openly and visibly grieving the loss of his best friend, and said, "Eddie, he ain't in heaven, he's down there in hell." It was appalling. It wasn't good heat. It was cheap, exploitative, and crossed a line of human decency. It broke the unspoken contract with the audience. Fans were furious. It wasn't a character being insulted. They were using a real man's death and his friend's real profound grief to get a cheap boo for a wrestling storyline. Many fans and even other wrestlers have never forgiven that moment. This exploitation continued with Rey Mysterio's 2006 World Heavyweight Championship run. Rey, one of the greatest high flyers in history, won the Royal Rumble, dedicating it to Eddie. He went on to win the title at WrestleMania 22, dedicating it to Eddie. Every promo, every match was for Eddie. On one hand, it was a sweet tribute from a genuine friend. On the other, it felt orchestrated. It felt hollow. It felt like the company was strapping a rocket to Rey, not because they finally believed in him as a main event talent, but because they could market the tragedy. It put a shadow over what should have been Rey's greatest triumph. It cheapened his incredible career-spanning accomplishment by making it feel like a pity championship. This was made even worse when Eddie's own nephew, Chavo Guerrero Jr., was turned into a heel, complaining that Rey was disrespecting and using Eddie's name. The entire thing felt icky. It was uncomfortable because, from a certain point of view, Chavo's complaint felt absolutely correct. Finally, there is the dark, tragic shadow of Chris Benoit's actions in 2007. The two were incredibly close friends, and by all accounts, Benoit was profoundly and fundamentally broken by Eddie's death. Many who were close to them, including Chavo Guerrero and Chris Jericho, have stated that Eddie was Benoit's anchor. He was the one person Benoit would talk to, the one person who could pull him back from his own intense, brooding nature. That hotel room in Minneapolis where Chavo found Eddie Benoit was one of the first people he called. Benoit flew in immediately, saw his best friend, and by all accounts was never the same. He became paranoid, deeply depressed, a shell of himself. He would write long, rambling entries in his journal, addressed to his dead friend. Eddie was his support system, and when that anchor was gone, Chris drifted into the darkness that would eventually, 18 months later, lead to the horrific tragedy that ended his own life and the lives of his wife and son. It's a what if that haunts wrestling to this day. What if Eddie hadn't died? Would he have been able to save his friend? It's a question that can never be answered. This connection also links their fates in a more chilling scientific way. Both men, through grueling, high-impact careers, were later found to have significant brain trauma. Their shared struggles, their brotherly bond, and their tragic ends are inextricably linked, forming one of the most painful chapters in the sport's history. These debates, while sometimes painful, are crucial for understanding the full context of Eddie Guerrero's life and legacy. They highlight the complexities of an industry that, while providing immense entertainment, has also faced profound challenges regarding athlete welfare, drug policies, and mental health support. Eddie's story, therefore, becomes not just a personal tragedy, but a catalyst for ongoing reflection and potential positive change within professional wrestling. Eddie Guerrero's death on November 13th, 2005, at the heartbreaking age of 38, sent shock waves through the wrestling world and beyond. He was found by his nephew Chavo Guerrero Jr. in his Minneapolis hotel room, a heart tragically giving out too soon, a devastating consequence of past substance abuse. The news plunged WWE into a profound state of mourning. That night, both Raw and SmackDown were transformed into emotional tribute shows, a testament to the universal respect and love he commanded. Wrestlers, some barely holding back tears, shared anecdotes, memories, and heartfelt goodbyes. The raw, unfiltered grief from his closest friends, particularly Chris Benoit, Rey Mysterio, and Chavo Guerrero Jr., was palpable and heartbreaking to witness. Eddie's passing had an immediate and lasting impact on the wrestling world. It served as a stark, painful reminder of the human cost of the industry's demanding lifestyle. In the wake of his death and other tragic losses around that time, WWE implemented its wellness policy, a comprehensive drug testing program designed to prevent substance abuse and safeguard the health of its performers. While imperfect, this policy was a direct response to the critical questions raised by Eddie's death and remains a significant part of WWE's operational framework, albeit one that constantly evolves. Culturally, Eddie's significance continues to grow. He wasn't just a great wrestler, he was a trailblazer. As the first Mexican-American WWE champion, he broke barriers and inspired a generation of Latin wrestlers and fans. His Viva la Raza catchphrase became a rallying cry, celebrating his heritage with pride and passion. He proved that you didn't have to fit a preconceived mold to reach the top. You could be authentically yourself with all your unique quirks and cultural background and still achieve unparalleled success. His influence can be seen in countless wrestlers today who emulate his style, his charisma, and his ability to connect with an audience on a deeply emotional level. Emotionally, Eddie's story remains one of profound redemption. His journey from addiction to sobriety, culminating in a world championship, continues to be a powerful narrative of overcoming adversity. It teaches us about the resilience of the human spirit, the importance of second chances, and the unwavering power of love and support from family and friends. For anyone facing their own battles, Eddie's story serves as a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest valleys, there is a path back to the light. He taught us that it's okay to stumble, but it's never okay to stop trying. The WWE wellness policy. Let's not mince words. Eddie's death forced this to happen. It was the catalyst. It was the tragic wake-up call that the company could no longer ignore. This policy, which implemented random independent testing for steroids, painkillers, and recreational drugs, fundamentally changed the business. It changed the look of wrestlers. The era of the 300-pound cartoonishly muscled giant began to fade. The focus shifted, slowly but surely, from size to skill. It's not a perfect system, but it has, without a doubt, saved lives. It is one of the most important parts of Eddie's legacy, a legacy of protection for the next generation. He was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame almost immediately, In 2006, it was a foregone conclusion. His wife, Vicky, and his nephew, Chavo, accepted on his behalf. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking ceremony. And his influence, it's not just in the air, it's tangible. You see it in Sasha Banks. She's been outspoken that Eddie was her only inspiration. Her entire boss persona, the swagger, the attitude, it's pure Eddie. She's worn tribute gear. She does the 3 amigos suplexes. She hits the frog splash. She is a direct descendant of his style and charisma. You see it in Bayley. When she turned heel, how did she do it? She started cheating to win. She started pulling all the old school heel tricks, the very things Eddie perfected. You see it most clearly in Rey Mysterio's son Dominic Mysterio, playing the spoiled, disrespectful Rudo who hates his father. He's doing a direct modern-day interpretation of Eddie's 2005 character. The mommy stuff with Rhea Ripley is a direct echo of Eddie's mamacita obsession with China. The Guerrero bloodline, which Eddie's daughter Shaw married into by marrying wrestler Aiden English, is less influential than the spirit of Eddie, which lives on in Dominic. And then there's his widow, Vicky Guerrero. His death thrust her into the spotlight. And in one of the most unlikely stories, she became one of the greatest heels or villains of her generation. Her "excuse me" screech is legendary. She was a heat magnet, and she did it all by channeling that Guerrero spirit. She'd lie, cheat, and steal to help her clients win, all while playing the grieving widow. It was bizarre, brilliant, and a perfect, if strange, tribute. Even today, almost 20 years later, you will still hear it. In an arena somewhere in the world, a crowd will start to chant, "Thank you, Eddie." It's a testament to the fact that his connection with us, the fans, was real. It wasn't a character. It was a man. His story is a tragedy. There's no way around that. It ended far too soon, but it is also, and perhaps more importantly, the ultimate story of redemption. He fought back from the abyss and got it all back, his family, his faith, and the world championship. He reached the mountaintop. That's the Eddie Guerrero we remember. The champion, the father, the survivor, the artist.